Kirkpatrick Price. We are a licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to over 350 companies in more than 46 states, Canada, Asia, and Europe. Our firm has over 10 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests which strengthen information security and compliance controls. My name is Sarah Morris. I'm the managing editor at Kirkpatrick Price, and I just kind of wanted to share a few more learning opportunities with you. We keep a regular blog, and we talk about lots of relevant industry topics on there. So if you are interested in following something to kind of help keep you in the know about what's going on in the compliance world, I would encourage you to jump on there and subscribe. We also have several webinar series, this one being a very popular one, and we have several of our past webinars on our website available for viewing. Some of the topics that we've gone over in the past have been effective call monitoring, constructing an internal audit framework, compliance analytics, and just where to start as your first day on the job as a compliance officer. So, just a quick legal disclaimer. This information is not intended to be legal advice and may not be used as legal advice. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Jesse. Jesse has over 12 years of experience in the ARM industry as Vice President of Business Development and the Chief Compliance Officer for Kirkpatrick Price. She is focused on assisting clients in meeting regulatory compliance and information security objectives. So without any further ado, since we have so much information to cover today, Jesse, I'd like to go on and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And like Sarah mentioned, we do have a lot of material to cover, and we do have some very good speakers joining me today. But I do want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature. The Q&A feature is on the toolbar under Options. We definitely want to get to as many questions as we possibly can, but we do have a lot of material to cover. So if for some reason we can't cover all the questions, we will follow up with you afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started. So just, I guess, further background about Kirkpatrick Price. Sarah gave you a pretty high-level overview. A lot of people that attend our webinars for regulatory compliance issues really don't realize that we are primarily an information security auditing firm. So as Sarah mentioned, we are a licensed CPA firm able to perform the SSA 16 and SOC 2 audits. We're also a PCI QSA firm performing PCI assessments. And from the regulatory compliance side, which is really my area of the company, and we do a lot of consulting, a lot of policy procedure drafting, some training, vendor auditing. We do a lot of CFPB consulting and gap assessment work as well. So moving on, what we're here to talk about today, just to give you a background of why I feel so very passionate about this topic. Over the last several years, my primary focus has been really about CFPB compliance. Developing the structure of a CMS at my previous company, and then the last several years working with Kirkpatrick Price to help other companies in the form of auditing and consulting. And the one thing that always stands out to me are the employees that we interview. And you can really tell a lot about a company's culture of compliance, about their overall compliance posture by speaking with their employees. And I find that when there's a positive attitude towards compliance, you have a lot of employee buy-in, and you have a lot of just a positive working environment for everyone. So we're going to talk about today steps that you can take in creating a positive culture, tips for creating some incentive programs, overcoming bad habits and negative behavior, and ways to communicate risk in order to change management direction. So before we get into any further discussion, I want to introduce our panelists today that I'm very happy to have us join today. Cheryl Cooper, she is the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of Monarch Recovery Management. She helps maintain Monarch's exemplary compliance record. She remains current on all the constantly evolving laws and regulations in the industry, and she oversees and manages regulatory compliance within the organization, as well as designs and implements rigorous internal controls, policies, and procedures. Cheryl is also on the MAP member attorney list, as well as an ACA fellow, has the ACA fellow designation. So Cheryl, welcome. Thank you for joining the webinar today.
Thank you.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Monarch for the listeners today. You know, where are you located? You know, approximately how many collectors do you have, and how would you describe from a high level some of the cultural changes you've seen over the past few years?
Sure. Monarch Recovery Management is a third-party collection agency. We're located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we have approximately 100 collectors. And as far as the cultural changes, I can say that, you know, Monarch has always been a customer service-oriented collection agency and has always had the philosophy to use a positive approach to collections and compliance. And what I've seen in the past few years is that this approach that has been used in our agency for quite some time is what the regulators as well as the clients and the CFPB in particular are looking for, and the shift is moving away from aggressive, rude collectors to a more customer service, positive approach to collections.
Very good. Let's move on and introduce Gordon Beck. Gordon is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Marketing Officer for Diversified Consultants, Inc. DCI is the nation's only telecom-specific collection agency specializing in the recovery of wireless, landline, cable, satellite, internet, VoIP, voice over IP, and home security systems. Gordon has taken DCI from 4 major clients and 180 agents with 1 location to 14 major clients, 615 agents, and 4 locations. So a very large collection agency that Gordon is in charge of right now. He's also a very motivational educational speaker in the industry, and I think once you hear more from Gordon today, if you don't know him already, you will definitely feel the same. Gordon has participated in panels, debates, and has done several individual speeches on industry-related events. In February, Gordon won the TRMA President's Award for 2015 for Speech of the Year, and was also featured on the cover of the Collection Advisor magazine, which you see the picture there. Twice in the last 18 months, once individually and once for being recognized as one of the 2014 30 most influential collection professionals. In addition to this, this is very impressive, Gordon made an appearance on ABC World News with Diane Sawyer in an attempt to defend the collection industry on TCPA challenges, and has been constantly campaigning to change the image of the industry. So Gordon, I'm very grateful for you to join us today.
Jesse, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Gordon, as we can see here on your bio, you've experienced some significant growth at DCI in a time of uncertainty for many as far as regulatory compliance. You know, what would you say are some of the key factors of success that you have seen and how you have managed to build such a positive culture of compliance?
Well, you know, contrary to some belief, DCI and our exposure with the TCPA, primarily because we collect for most of or all of the wireless companies, might give people a first look at us and think, well, that agency must not be compliant. It's definitely the contrary to that. In 2009, DCI won the National Agency of the Year Award out of 6,600 agencies for how we treated consumers. We always would tell the consumers, these are the positives that come out of paying the bill, rather than saying this is what's going to happen to you if you don't. So just like Monarch, we have always had the customer service type approach, and our growth is based specifically on that. Now, I know it says I'm the Chief Marketing Officer, and that title, it's fitting for what I do, but we do not have a sales staff. Our company grew one client at a time from word of mouth and performance, and because we've been known to uphold the image of our clients. So I directly relate compliance to that. Now, compliance in the old days was our motto, just be nice, you treat people with respect, speak to them like you would speak to your own family, your own mother. Nowadays, with UDAP, GBLA, everything related to the CFPB and how they look at our industry, down to specifics with verification and how you're talking to consumers about their disputes, it is so much more in-depth and detailed now than it used to be. And so it was still a culture shock. And so in our growth and with our clients' growth, we all learned together, and we decided that compliance was going to be the #1 thing that our agency was going to focus on. And if we were compliant, even though we might not collect as much money at the beginning, as long as we're able to do this 20 years from now, rather than being out of business in 2, then that was fine with us. And making that commitment that our scorecards might not be as great as they have been in the past, and that the people that have been around for many years that might have been stuck in their own ways would not stay employed if indeed they were not on our compliance train, so to speak. And by having that mentality, and of course, still maintaining our just be nice mentality with the consumers, it gave us the opportunity to grow and, again, continue business today in a very tough environment.
That's great. And what I really want everyone listening today to take away from both Cheryl and Gordon is their positive approach to compliance within their organizations. Gordon demonstrating the ability to grow, Cheryl demonstrating the ability to grow and establish great relationships with their clients and to maintain an overall positive approach. I mean, it's really hard, and we're definitely going to talk through some challenges along the way that chief compliance officers and other leaders face. But the one thing that I really wanted to bring to this webinar were two very powerful leaders within their organizations, and just to share their own positive approach on compliance. So I just want to thank both of you for joining me today. So let's move on, Sarah. We're going to talk a little bit about, obviously this is the Chief Compliance Officer series, and what we want to do with this series is to educate and inspire and empower, the Chief Compliance Officers out there that are struggling within their everyday role, or maybe just a leader within their organization that's trying to make some cultural changes. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, this is I believe it's the 4th or 5th installment of this webinar series. And just to kind of backtrack for a minute, our first webinar in this series was really about, it's your first day on the job, what's next, which means what are the documented responsibilities of a Chief Compliance Officer. It's not a role that should be taken lightly. It's a very important role within the organization. And, straight out of the CFPB examination guidance material, that's where these lines come from. You must maintain the authority to lead a compliance program independent from business units, must be qualified and experienced, and you must administer the compliance management system. And as you'll see from the most recent supervisory highlights published last month, they're still indicating that examinations are uncovering overall weaknesses in the CMS. So that the role of being a strong leader within the organization in the realm of compliance and managing a compliance management system is very, very important. And so that's what we're here today to try to help you overcome some of the challenges that you face as a Chief Compliance Officer. So we can move on here. So today we're going to talk about creating a positive culture of compliance. And the big statement here that I want you to take away with is driving cultural change within the organization requires strong leadership skills. And I want to share with you just a personal experience. I recently read a very good book by John Maxwell called The 5 Levels of Leadership. And as I made my way through the levels, all I could think about was the connection between the role of the Chief Compliance Officer and effective leadership skills. The position, by the way, is the very first level. You cannot create buy-in and change culture with position alone. So you've got the position as the Chief Compliance Officer. How can you inspire others, and how can you lead others into this culture of change is what I really want you to think about. And one thing that I'll quote from John Maxwell from the book, he really says, there is no journey without leadership, And to have an idea of where you want to go, you have to have vision. So vision is kind of the first thing that I want to talk about. It's not the most important thing, but obviously you have to have an idea of what you want to change before you set out to change it. So let's move on to communication, because that's where the real important information here is that I want to share with you. First, starting off with the importance of effective communication. To be able to drive, cultural change, you need to have good communication skills. So communicating with collectors. The first step is to deliver clear expectations. And I really want you to focus on the word useful here, because useful and accessible policies, procedures, and work instructions. I firmly believe that you should not have expectations unless you have them documented, and I think the CFPB would agree with that, saying if it's not written down, you're really not doing it. So I think having useful and accessible policies and procedures is really step one. Definitely training and awareness. The more that you train, the more that you get them on board, the more they're going to follow, and they're going to understand, why compliance is so important. But Cheryl, before I get into the next step, what are some tips that you can provide here regarding, gaining the respect of collectors in order to drive the change you want to see?
Well, you know, I think it all starts with having a fair and impartial QA/compliance system, and establishing a fair and equitable QA process. The collectors, you know, initially are not going to probably like being told and being scored and being criticized, and you have to also find a way to do that that is applicable to everyone, and the criticism has to be constructive, not just punitive. And so in our situation, and what I've seen in other agencies with similar attitudes is, you know, you use positive reinforcement with the collectors and management and operations. You know, in our situation, we have monthly QA compliance bonuses / rewards in addition to their normal collection money goals and rewards that they receive for that. And we also have, you know, contests and raffles and things like that. And in order to participate in those sorts of things, the collectors must have a certain QA score as well as be able to be on goal. We also believe that you have to have a strong set of disciplinary, you know, punishments and or a disciplinary system in place, and that has to be applied uniformly and even-handedly throughout the agency, without regard to whether you're the top collector, whether you're related to somebody in the company, whether you're you know, brand new on the job or had been here for 20 years. And once you do that on a consistent basis, I think you start to gain the respect of the collectors on the floor, as well as, in my situation in particular, having a strong presence on the collection floor.
Absolutely. You touched on something kind of quickly, but the reward for compliance. And I wanted to ask Gordon, because Gordon takes the idea of rewarding for compliance efforts kind of to the next level within DCI. So, Gordon, would you mind kind of sharing some of the stories of ways that you've rewarded for compliance?
Yeah, I don't mind a bit. I'll take everyone back to January of 2013, and it was in the midst of us being bombarded with TCPA lawsuits. Our agency had done $40 million in revenue the year prior, so we were definitely under the jurisdiction of the CFPB. And I was looking at our compliance team, which was only a couple people at the time, our quality team, which was maybe 4 or 5, and I just knew going into 2013 that the landscape would change, and that if I didn't change with it, that you'd be out of business in a matter of no time whatsoever. So what I did is I came out to the staff. I do a yearly as well as a monthly meeting in front of the entire company, and I told everyone that everything you've learned, everything you know, and everything you do at DCI is changing for good. And to show you how serious I am about it, I am going to hold a contest right now, and as we train and we teach and we give you the positive reinforcement, I want to reward you all for not only what you do every day here, but also for your investment in the future of the company. Let's face it, collectors don't come into any collection job and say, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. You have to get that mentality in their head that when they get up every morning, that this is the last job they're ever going to have, and if they treat it that way, no, it may not be their last job, but they'll make more money than they ever thought, and they'll learn a ton along the way, getting them invested. So what I did is I had a contest, and I gave away 2 brand new vehicles, one in Jacksonville's office and one in Portland's office, and we had a 6-month contest. Those who hit their budget every month for the first 6 months got 3 raffle tickets. Everyone that hit 5 out of 6 months and got 1 raffle ticket, but the kicker here was they could have absolutely 0 compliance issues. They had complaints, Better Business Bureau, AG. They had to have all their quality reviews from their calls that they listened to passed. It was, for all intents and purposes, a very difficult contest to be a part of. But my point to them was, you will never in your life have a better chance or better odds to win a new car. And I'm grateful to say here a year and a half later that the two victors are still with the company. They're still thriving, and we've been able to spin off more contests, such as this year. Now that we have 3 locations with our 4th one in construction, we wanted to do the Lucky Sevens contest. So we're giving away $7,000 to one lucky winner in each office for the same concept as the year prior. But what I learned was that although that was effective, it wasn't effective ongoing as much as it was off the bat. Who's going to give away 2 brand new cars if you're not serious about your initiative? So we took it a little step further, and we started to do smaller things that gave more instant gratification that they had complete control over to win. For example, you go through the entire month, you get no compliance issues, you could still get your raffle ticket or qualifies that month for one of the raffle tickets, but the next month, if you have 0 issues, we're lowering your quota by $500. Now, to me, that's $125 extra in bonus I'm paying them. But one slip up by an agent is going to cost me $5,000. So that program 100% paid for itself. And like we mentioned earlier, it's all about how do you get your team to be invested into the compliance factor when in turn they feel that they're going to lose money and not have the ability to collect like before. And that is where showing them every month, playing calls, showing them more compliant calls that are wonderful in tonality and pleasant. If you're nice to people and you speak up and you're respectful, it doesn't matter what you say. So you don't have to be non-compliant to collect more money. And slowly over time of proving that by playing calls for them month after month and having the contests and just never letting the ideal die. So much in this industry, we have a great strategy, have a great idea, have a great contest, but a few days go by and it's out of sight, out of mind. So I think the biggest challenge we all face is making sure that no matter what you do in compliance, whether it's contests, whether it's punishments on the opposite end of the stick, that you're consistent and that somehow, some way, your management every day is putting that idea in the agent's head to let them know so they don't forget about not only what they stand to lose, but also what they stand to gain.
Yeah, there's so many things about what you just described, Gordon, that are really powerful for people attending to really get today. And one of the things is it takes a time period sometimes to really commit a change, to break bad habits and to change. So the 6-month time period, I know that just from researching, cycles of change, it takes roughly 45 days for, of repeated habits to make a change. So I think, having something that, goes out at least 45 days, if not into 6 months, really changing habits. And the other thing that I think is so powerful, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later in more detail, but Gordon in his role as Chief Operating Officer, really being the one to communicate with employees, this is important. This compliance, being compliant and treating consumers fairly is #1 important. And setting that goal. And not everyone can give away, 2 cars. That's really not feasible. I know we have a lot of smaller agencies, collection law firms, and smaller companies listening today, and I know that they're probably laughing, like I can't do that. But I think, the goal is that, make it a big deal. Get the leaders of the organization involved and set the tone. That's really what the tone at the top that we keep talking about is, and, make it #1 priority, make it make it visible for everyone. So. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to talk a little bit now more about the challenges of communicating with the board of directors and executive management. So I think one of the things that I commonly hear is how do I kind of talk with the owners of the business or the board of directors? How can I communicate more effectively with, and get buy-in from ownership? And I think that this is a true challenge, and we cannot give, specific instructions on how to deal with this because we want you to keep your jobs. But if you're in an environment where, the ownership, board of directors, or executive management may be a bit more hands-off, you may need to start with educating them. I mean, it's definitely important educating them on your role as a chief compliance officer, educating them on what is required of the company to maintain compliance. Utilize the CFPB examination procedures because it's right there in black and white as far as what your duties are, the requirements of keeping them educated, and definitely utilize, share with them the the relevant enforcement actions that have been put into place, because they need to truly understand the risk associated with the organization. I think if you start with education, start with what's in black and white, to be able to communicate why it's important, then because you really need their buy-in. You need that executive level support in order to, to drive change within the organization. If you don't have their support, it's going to be very, very difficult to make these changes. So I know, Gordon, I had a question for you here. What advice, I guess, would you give to someone trying to, communicate with the owners or the executive management on how to create change and understanding?
When dealing with owners and, of course, my mentor, the owner of DCI, and my experiences with him prior to his death, is that the number one question that's going to come out of the owner's mouth is, well, what's it going to cost me? And that's they're creatures of habit. They own a business. They want to know what the bottom line is. They want to know what their distributions are going to be. And, of course, they have a lot of things going on in their head about the future of the company. And so the burden on their shoulders is great. But when you're talking about something that is going to be the lifeblood of your agency, whether you're under the CFPB jurisdiction or not, the truth is nobody is safe. And in this world right now that we live in, no matter how big or small your company is, if you do not make the investment into the compliance and the quality departments of your company, you will not last. It's absolutely inevitable. Everything that's been put down on us and the investment it takes is absolutely great. We've been able to piece it together one step at a time. But the ultimate question would be, if I was talking to a chief compliance officer that was struggling in getting that investment from the owner because either the owner felt that the money collected would be less or the investment would be too great, it's the same thing I said in the first sentence when I got introduced, and that is, do you want to do this 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now? Or do you want to get as much money as you can now and just be done and get out? Because that's ultimately what's going to happen. And I'm not trying to fearmonger anyone in the audience. It's just the truth. Compliance has to come first. So number one thing that I would do is any issue that you're trying to get accomplished, whether it's an initiative, whether it's a technology, regardless of what it is, look at what you're trying to protect the company from. And then show specific case law, which is easy to find in the archives of ACA or Inside Arm, and show the ownership. This is what happened to this agency. Do you want our name to be on the front of Inside Arm talking about we've got fined or otherwise, or we have a class action lawsuit that we can't defend? Imagine what that would do to your business. If my company got something like that, then I would be in jeopardy of losing a Fortune 50 company, and I would probably have to lay off 100 people. And so what's at stake, and I give this analogy in the best possible way. Over the years, collecting telecom debt, it's the lowest yielding business of all the collection industry, and the margins are also the lowest. And I always ask the ownership, I need this technology, I need this number of people, I want to get a new facility, whatever it may be. And I said, I have to be number one. Because if we're number one, then we'll be able to get the volume, we'll strengthen the partnership, and so what if we make less money? If we keep this thing for a long period of time and we grow the partnership, then we're more secure in that relationship. And the same goes for compliance. So what if you don't get a distribution check this year or next? So what if your bottom line is not what you want it to be? You'll pay less taxes. But ultimately, the investment in your quality and your compliance department will give you the longevity that you look for to take care of your family and even generations beyond that. Why end something that you can afford to over a quick buck? I've never understood that, and it's going to take a chief compliance officer that is bold enough to walk right in the owner's office, look them in the eye, and say, I'm telling you this because I care.
Those are great points, Gordon. I want to also highlight, too, I mean, it's the chief compliance officer's responsibility to update the board of directors and executive management on a regular basis of, the consumer complaints and the associated risk. So it's definitely, having them have their understanding and having their support is so critical. And we're going to move on to the next slide because I want to talk to Cheryl about our next topic. But there's not only communicating with this level of management, there's also communicating with the next tier of management, so possibly, you know, the chief compliance officer's peers or operations management. So there's definitely an area of need here as far as effective communication with that level of management. So I guess one of my recommendations here is obviously involve them in the risk assessment process. You know, explain in the same way that you may have to educate the executive level management, the middle level management needs to be educated on risk as well. So Cheryl, I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about the importance of, you know, providing a risk-reward analysis when proposing some operational changes.
Sure. But before I actually do that, I just wanted to add one thing that off of what Gordon said, and that is that, at least in my opinion, the Chief Compliance Officer role is a multifaceted role and very important within any organization. They have to be a problem solver. They have to be a leader. Sometimes they have to be a bridge builder. And in winning over the executive management or leadership team of your organization, I have found that it's best to go in with confidence and leadership and be prepared and have your ducks all in a row, and be able to show them why the things that you want to do or implement are important and necessary. In addition, when you have to win over and find a way to win over the operations team, and you can do that by demonstrating that you have a common goal with operations, and sometimes even include them in some sort of brainstorming or you know, discussion about what you're wanting to implement before you do so that you learn the impact on operations before you actually make that change. And by including them and making it more of a partnership, you get a little bit less, you know, stonewalling or negativity or whatever you want to call it. So you have to keep an open mind. Compliance often thinks that they have to fit within a certain box. Just in my opinion and my experience, it doesn't really work that well when that happens. Now, moving on to the risk-reward analysis, I find that it's a key tool that is used to in proposing any operational change. Most of the time, as Gordon said, and is my experience as well, you know, people in operations, they don't want to change anything because the revenue's coming in, everything's going fine, and they don't want to change anything because they feel that it's going to have some sort of negative impact. So by presenting and showing them a risk-reward analysis, you can actually demonstrate to them how making a change can actually increase revenue and increase reward rather than just be a negative thing. And I also say that whenever I'm proposing a change, I also go in with at least one solution. You don't just say you have to change this and, you know, you can't do this and you can't do that. You have to go in and maybe you say those things, but then you say, but we can do this and we can do that. And, you know, our goal is to still get to Z, but in a more compliant way. So you kind of have to be that bridge builder and keep an open mind in communicating with the operations management as well as the collectors and even the executive management. And you know, using those incentives and rewards and things like that are great ways to accomplish that.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you said there, Cheryl. And we were kind of having a great discussion amongst the three of us yesterday about how important it is for the Chief Compliance Officer to also have an understanding as much as possible, you know, with operations, because just bringing your issue and laying it on the table is sometimes not effective, but coming to the table with a possible solution that you can talk about and you can discuss is so important. You know, when we talk about this topic, I'm envisioning a meeting, you know, where the CCO is recommending a change and operations is there resisting it. And, you know, what can you do? I think that this is where good communication and understanding with the operations management is so critical. Having them understand the risks involved, you know, why is this risky? And Gordon said multiple times, you know, we want to be in business years from now. We have to make this change, you know, using all the documentation that you can find and proof of what's been happening in the industry to prove your point if need be. But you're not just coming and throwing down an issue saying, you know, here we have to stop doing this immediately. but coming to the table with some recommendations and you doing your homework and coming with some possible solutions is definitely much more effective, for people that are struggling with that. And I really hope that people that are listening right now ask a question. If there's something that you want some guidance on, if there's an issue that you're struggling with that we can help you with, because we're actually moving through the material a little bit faster than I thought we were. So I really hope people have some good questions out there. So I don't know, Gordon, did you have anything to add as far as this one? I know that your position is quite a bit different because your Chief Compliance Officer, David Goodwin, is a very lucky guy, in my opinion, that he has you and your understanding of compliance to work with. But is there anything else that you can add as far as, gaining that understanding between compliance and operations?
Yes, someone just asked a question on the panel here, and it's a great question. But when discussing with the ownership about well, listen, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to spend, and the ownership comes back and says, well, we need to get our revenue up first before we do that. And I kind of want to start with the top here because David, he worked for American Express, he worked for another collection agency, he's been in operations, he's been in compliance, and when he came into DCI as a new employee, I didn't just make him the Chief Compliance Officer, I had to see what he was made of. So he started as our internal auditor. I quickly learned that he was the right gentleman for the role, and the gentleman that I work with in operations is, two guys that I've been, not only friends, but also comrades in battle with for the last, 10 years. So here's a new gentleman coming in, and it was so difficult for me because I had to stay steadfast on David's side, unless, of course, I knew he was blatantly wrong or approached something in a negative manner. I had to take his side, and it really created kind of me as the mediator between two different sides. So I realized quickly that our agency did not become successful by having internal animosity or infighting or anything that was even close to that, and that I needed to do something. So slowly but surely, I got the guys together, and one day at a time, we started taking every single item that we were battling, and we were coming to common ground on it, something that they could sign off in compliance and something that would not negatively impact operation. And so I really think it's all about the communication. You have to always back compliance because the minute you don't, trust me, you're going to get burned. And as a Chief Compliance Officer, I don't want you to ever think that, the last thing you want to be is I told you so type of individual. But everybody's been right so far today in talking about how, as a Chief Compliance Officer, coming to the table, using your knowledge of the business and saying, we can't do this, but we can do this. And then have operations say, well, what about this? And then before you know it, you've come to a resolution, everybody's happy, and now my two departments not only coexist, but they get along great, and now I don't even have to get involved anymore. But it was painful, believe me, when I tell you, it was not easy, and feelings got hurt. But at the end of the day, we are as compliant as we've ever been, and we can sleep at night.
Right, and I think the most important is for that level of management to present a united front, to the employees, because the collectors, the employees with the company, as much as you maybe not realize that they see that. And I think that once they see that management has made, such an effort and has a united front about compliance, it changes the culture, and I think that's what we're really trying to get across, with this webinar. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. How do you change that? And I think the easiest way to do that is to get, you need to get management on board. Management needs to get on board.
Jesse, I'd like to make a mention, not to interrupt, and I apologize, but, another question that just came my way was, a lot of the top operations executives as well as ownership, top performers can be excused. That is the #1 most critical error that anyone could do. If you are, I call that caveman collections. If you forgive because fee forgives all, then there's no way this will ever work. Not only will you get sued for discrimination, but also you're going to create an atmosphere that says, well, if I get to a certain number, then I'm no longer under the compliance umbrella and I don't have to follow it. I literally told Art of War, Shunju, sometimes you have to chop off a head. And it's so true that when we did these contests, and of course I had people that said, oh, that don't pertain to me. I you know, I make $100,000 a year. It doesn't, you know, well, I had to terminate several people that had been here over 5 years before my point was finally made. So you have to be willing to get rid of anyone, and I mean anyone, that is not 100% about compliance. And you might think that that's crazy, but I've done it myself. I'm proof in the pudding. No one here has the prima donna attitude that they're untouchable, and that too resonates to everyone, whether they've been here for 5 years or they've been here for 5 days.
If I could just chime in here on that also, the same thing happened here, and when I came in and the compliance became much more of a forefront issue with the agency, you know, I ended up having to terminate collectors that had been here 20 years that weren't willing to change and follow the rules despite being given numerous opportunities to do so. And some of those people were good generating collectors, but they weren't grasping and they weren't participating and buying into the mentality. And, you know, over time, by doing that, and the other collectors see that even though this person who collected a huge amount of money is no longer here, or it's a relative, you know, I suspended the relative, a collector who is a relative of one of the owners, and the entire collection floor was like in shock. And after that, you know, everyone, and the management and ownership of the company stood behind me. And after that, everyone sort of like started really jumping on the bandwagon, besides the fact that we do reward each month compliant collectors, and then quarterly. And, you know, last year our most compliant collector award was from somebody who was not one of the top revenue generating people, but he is excellent on the phone. And so when they see those sort of things, you know, you can make big changes pretty quickly. But as far as the ownership and management go, trying to convince them, I think you have to, if you keep being stonewalled or you know, not receiving any support, you're not really going to be very effective, and all you can do is document your efforts. And sometimes in certain situations you can try implementing things in a smaller set. So you could try to change the ownership's or management's mind by just saying, well, I understand you don't want to do this across the board, but let's maybe try this revenue stream, or let's just try this group of collectors, to then reconduct your risk analysis and your risk-reward analysis and show it to them and show them how the compliance positively impacted those situations. And then you can possibly start to gain the support of the ownership or management.
That's great. And we actually had two really good questions that were very similar in nature. The first question is, what strategies have you found helpful in communicating compliance needs to operations? Operations will often overlook bad behavior on top performers. And the other question I thought was very much along the same lines is, how do you overcome ownership that not only lacks the basic understanding and importance of compliance in a smaller agency, but has no true operational understanding of the business either? I think that both of these are very much kind of in line, because I think that you need to communicate with, whether it's operations management or executive level management, in terms that they'll understand. Because in today's environment for an agency specifically, and I know the same goes true for collection law firms. I think we have some of our payment processing clients that are listening in today as well. It's a necessary element of doing business today. I mean, you cannot have a lack of, you know, a complete CMS. You cannot have, you know, no policies, procedures, compliance, because the clients are not going to want to do business with you. So if it's the owner of the business, your discussion is a little bit different. It is, you know, do you want to grow? What clients do you want to go after? Do you want to do business for a creditor directly? Because there's so much auditing going on nowadays, as everyone probably listening knows this. And it's a simple component of even getting, you know, your foot in the door. I think phase one of starting to do business with a new client is, you know, sending your policies and procedures, and then beyond that, it's the audit. So, and I think that what's really, really trending now, and I think if you can quickly gather this if you start talking to people, is that the focus is on compliance. It's not necessarily driven 100% by performance anymore. You know, I mean, there's so much activity and there's so much happening that having, you know, your operations be compliant is critical. So I think my advice or my answer to those questions is speak to them in the language that they understand. You know, and as Gordon really highlighted this earlier, do you want to stay in business? You know, it's a necessary component of being in this industry and doing business today. And I think however you can relay that to whether operations or that executive level management, that's what they need to understand. This is a necessity of survival. And the thing that I never like to educate people based on fear. I think that it needs to be a positive. That's why we're talking about the culture of compliance today. It needs to be done in as positive way as possible. But I think you need to get down to bottom line numbers. You know, as Gordon mentioned, the owners of the business sometimes just want to know what's it going to cost me, or you know, and really what is it going to cost me is a valuable conversation, because if you're not compliant and you can't pass your client's audits, then it's going to cost you that business. You're not going to be able to continue that relationship any longer. So,
Jesse, I'd like to also piggyback on that statement about cost. And there are some things that you can look at that don't really cost anything at all. We all have a compliance or a quality department, and in most cases we have both completely separate entities. And what we would like to do is look at how much volume you have, how many calls are you making, and what real impact does your staff have on the overall volume that's going out. In a lot of cases, it will be small. Now, what we did was we decided, hey, I want to expand my compliance in my quality department, and I wanted to do it without spending a penny. I've got 55 managers that I was then able to put the burden of responsibility of their people squarely upon their shoulders, which means not only did they have to know every single nook and cranny of the law, but their people would be tested and needed to know as well. If they did not know, the repercussions would be on the manager. If the complaints come in, it's not the agent that gets in trouble. They do, but it's the manager as well. And I always believed in that, like everybody said today, the positive reinforcement with the agents is what's going to be the most effective. But when you have management that are making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year or more, these individuals need to be perfect in their compliance, and that is when you have to lay the burden of the responsibility on them. And I was able to take my compliance and quality department comprised of about 28 people, and now I've got 80 people all on the same mission, and it didn't cost me a penny.
I agree with Gordon on that. I mean, our managers also are responsible for the groups that work underneath them, and it is another level of quality assurance in addition to our QA people. The managers themselves have a certain amount of calls that they have to listen to themselves every single day, coach collectors, train them, even though they receive on-the-job training as well as classroom training as well as constant reinforcement. But another thing that we did here that sort of made the managers get the idea that this was real was we added to our internal disciplinary matrix the fact that if they found during one of their screenings some sort of violation or what they even perceived to be a violation and didn't turn it into the chief compliance officer, and it was subsequently discovered, those managers suffered severe consequences. So in order to make them buy in and make them be on board with compliance and the compliance first attitude, we had to institute something like that, and we do still have that in effect now.
That's great. Well, let's move on to our last slide here. We've talked so far about the three components of successful leadership, so vision, communication, and strategy being the last one. And the only reason why I kind of wanted to circle back around to this because I wanted to share the Plan, Do, Check, Act, because this is really the life cycle of your compliance management system. It doesn't stop. It keeps going, and you have to have a plan for continuous improvement. So as well as being a good communicator and having vision, the Chief Compliance Officer has to have a strategy for continuous improvement. So my recommendation here is that, using monitoring and audit results to plan for future improvement, effectively react to new rules, continue to involve management in the evaluation of risk. I really think this is key here as far as our topic today, to involve the managers in understanding what the risks are. I think that any operational manager needs to understand when they make decisions and when they make changes, how it affects the overall risk of the company and what does that mean. And I think most importantly, employees need to see management support of compliance starting at the very, very top. Training, awareness, and continuous and fair equal treatment that we just talked about, those are keys to continuing this cycle of improvement. And lastly, like I said, I'm showing this plan, do, check, act model because the cycle never ends. The CCO has a very important role in managing the CMS, and it's never something that's just documented, put on the shelf, and rest. I mean, it's a continuous challenge. It's a continually challenging to communicate with not only collectors but with the executive management. The education never stops. So I think that all of those kind of lead into, creating this culture that hopefully is very positive. So hopefully we have a couple more questions, but I think we're about ready to wrap up here. Let's take a quick look here. I do have one question here I'll throw out. I don't know exactly how relevant it is, but we have someone asking, is there an industry standard as to how many quality assurance agents per employee reviewed or reviews performed? In addition to, do you find it helpful to have quality teams made up of seasoned employees who are specialists in the areas that they review? So I think we're talking about the QA team makeup. Is it important to have them be seasoned employees? And is there any type of industry standard as far as how many agents per employee?
I can answer that. There's really no industry standard because it really comes down to what are the logistics for each agency and what is the ability for them for as far as their resources is concerned to have as many as possible. At the end of the day, there's not an agency out there that has enough for the number of reps that they have. There's just no possible way. I would personally say that in a perfect world, 1 for every 3 units would be fantastic. That's a unit that might average 12, so that's 39, 36 plus 3 supervisors would be 39 people per one, but that is also very difficult to do because, again, when the chief compliance officers are selling this to the ownership, immediately the ownership's going to think that these are non-revenue generating positions. My rebuttal to that is, no, they may not generate revenue, but they protect the revenue we do make, and there are insurance policies. So in a perfect world, it would be 1 for every 39, but I have asked this question on multiple platforms and multiple summit meetings, and there is no industry standard.
I agree with Gordon. There isn't an industry standard at all, and I also think you have to look at what the revenue ability is and what the factors are for each organization. I mean, we don't have we have more quality assurance people than that. Our team probably has no more than 10 for each agent. We score 10 calls per collector per month over various different types of calls that are listened to, et cetera. But we also use speech analytics, which even though it's an expensive software program, you can cover so much more by a number of calls, volume of calls, by using that as a tool. We do not use that exclusively, and I don't know very many people that do use it exclusively, but it can help you sort through, finding things that are blatant violations without spending people time in doing that. So something that you might want to consider. Also, I found by being here, our QA team used to be located in the same building, and we didn't want anyone making friends with the collectors on the floor and that kind of thing. So our QA team is now in a separate building where they have no interaction whatsoever, and that makes for far less any sort of collusion type efforts or managers trying to influence the people in QA or anything of that nature. And in addition to that, in order to keep the QA process clean, so to speak, there is no direct communication from anyone on the collection floor to the QA department. All communications regarding quality assurance and the scoring and or anything else that comes out of QA goes to the compliance office, which is me, and not to anyone on the floor, and it's then disseminated depending on what I determine. And if they have a problem with something from the floor, they have to bring it to this office, and it then goes through to QA. And we also, in order to keep things fair and you know, there's no feelings hurt on any side, the people in QA rotate and score different groups every month, so that there are no, you know, allegations like this person's easy versus this person's a difficult score, and so on. So we try every which way we can to make that. And our QA team is made up of both seasoned collection industry people as well as brand new people. And believe it or not, sometimes the seasoned ones don't pick up on things that the brand new ones do. So you can't just go by and say, well, I need to get all these ex-collectors in my QA department, because a lot of them have bad habits they've had from somewhere else or whatever, and they miss things. And, you know, you just need someone who's bright, who cares, and wants to be bought into the whole program and follow what they're trained to do.
We have a really good question here, too, that I think there is some common misunderstanding about. Somebody asked, you know, what is the difference between a compliance officer and QA? I know that in some companies there are individuals that are monitoring and listening, you know, for compliance separate from QA. So is there anything either of you can speak to as far as separation between actual QA and compliance?
Well, if I could answer that, at least in this organization, QA has a specific role, and that is the scoring, listening, monitoring of calls. And they keep, you know, individual collector scorecards and things of that nature. But as far as the way we see compliance at this agency, the compliance officer has a much more, and the compliance office in general, it's much more than just the calls. It's you know, what's happening in the law. It's what's happening with the regulations. It's helping the training department update their materials with every change that comes in. It's educating the collectors. Even though we have a training staff, many times I have small groups and I'm out on the collection floor educating them about the new policies. It's creating the memorandums and giving those memorandums and policies out to the collectors. So QA is totally different in my opinion. Gordon might have a different view.
No, I agree 1,000%. They are totally different.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up today. We can probably go to the last slide there, Sarah. Definitely, if anybody has any questions or anything that either I or Sarah could help with, I know you have Sarah's contact information from the email invite, as well as, Sarah, can you talk about what they'll receive after the webinar today?
Yes, I'm going to be sending out a copy of the slides as well as a recording for the presentation today out to all of the attendees, probably later this afternoon. So be looking for that in your inbox. Also, don't forget to check out our website. We did a webinar on call monitoring a few months ago, and so there are some resources available on our website for that already. So there's just a lot of really great information on there. So I just urge you to please check that out, because you will benefit from it.
And I just want to thank Cheryl and Gordon both very much for joining us today. I hope that a lot of people attending found some value. I know I enjoy all of our conversations, so thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jesse. We really enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.